everyone, this is Anugrah Rao. Welcome to the 53rd episode of Microsoft Art of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Millionlights is a TV channel dedicated to improving skills of people and their employability. Now, let me tell you more about Microsoft Art of Code. Microsoft Art of Code is a series of lectures, courses, and talks by experts who are going to discuss the latest Microsoft technologies, topics related to programming, and industry forecasts that are all focused on employability. This course is basically for people pursuing computer science. This content has been created by our partner Microsoft. And today we have Christopher Harrison and Gabrielle with us who will teach you everything that you need to upgrade your skills. Now, let's move towards the course. In the previous episode, we covered web workers and server communication. In this episode, we will cover the remaining part of server communication, JavaScript libraries, and we will move towards the new episode of iOS programming. So let's get started.
Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about one of my favorite technologies, which is SignalR. See, here's the thing. Our WebSockets, as we've seen, are pretty rudimentary. That we've got one method to send messages, send. We've got one event to receive messages, on message. That's it. So if I wanted to do something different based on a different message type, I've got a little bit of a problem here because I need to figure out what the message type is. On top of that, if I'm wanting to send back and forth JSON objects, which I probably do, I'm responsible for doing all of the serialization. I got better things to do with my time than start worrying about all the different serialization. And last but not least, if it turns out that for whatever reason, the browser doesn't support WebSockets, it's up to me to manually build in the fallback. This is where SignalR comes into play. Now, SignalR is an ASP.NET technology. And it's designed to really abstract all of that away and really just allow us to program like we're used to programming. So you're going to notice that there's going to be full-blown objects, full-blown methods, automatic serialization, automatic fallback. Everything just looks like objects. So I get to program in the paradigm, sorry for throwing that word in there, that I'm used to, which is just simply using objects. I really don't want to worry about low-level socket development. It's why I use libraries like SignalR, like jQuery. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to actually just skip to the end here, and I'm just going to open up some pre-baked code. And I've already installed SignalR, which can be installed via NuGet package. And you're going to notice that I created what's called the SignalR hub, which is the server-side object for SignalR. And I called it Message Hub. Now, I want you to take a look at this. And I want you to notice how complex this is. And of course, I'm being facetious. It's not at all complex. That really, I just wrote a normal .NET method. What I did was I said, hey, I want you to return nothing. I want you to take one parameter, type string, call it message, and then I'm going to call this other method, which I'll get to in just a moment here, called message processed, where I'm just going to append out processed, which is just sort of my basic little echo, and have that pass into somewhere. That's it. Just like a normal method. And that's exactly the whole goal of SignalR, is that I'm doing just normal development. And granted, in my case, I'm just doing like a normal echoing. But if I wanted to call a database, if I wanted to call a web service, or whatever else it is that I might want to do, I can absolutely do that. Now, one of the other things that we mentioned is that we have the ability to call down to the server, call down to the client from the server. You're going to notice there's my send message. But the catch if I'm doing it manually is I need to hang on to that socket object. I don't have to do that here. SignalR is going to maintain all of that. I can actually access all of the clients by calling clients. It's inherited from Hub. And then off of here, you're going to notice I can filter. I can choose the specific client or clients that I want. So that if I want to just call back to whomever it was that called me, I've got caller. If I want to call everybody, I can do all. If I want to create groups, I actually have the ability to create groups. And you'll also notice that this is a dynamic object. And so we're able, if I go in and I call all, to just graft on another method. And so in my case, I grafted on this little method that I'm going to call message processed. And this is actually going to call a JavaScript method called message processed. In fact, let's go take a look at that over here inside of SignalR. And let me just put these next to one another. There we go. And there we go. OK. So what I want you to notice is there's my message processed right here. I know that the line breaks are unfortunately throwing things off a little bit here. I'm going to come out of this in just a moment, but I just want you to see this. So I want you to notice that there is my message processed, and then right here is my message processed. So this right here is going to call that right over there. The other very big thing is you're going to notice the name of that method is process message. You're going to notice the name of this method right here is process message. So from the client, when I call process message, that's automatically going to go up to the server. From the server, when I call message processed, that's automatically going to go down to the client. It's automagic. The other really cool thing there is you may notice the casing difference, that in .NET, convention is to use Pascal casing. In JavaScript, convention is to use Camel casing. SignalR will automatically take care of that for me. So that all I have to do is say, hey, I want the message hub. You'll notice, name of the object, message hub. Message hub. I want the client side. And on the client side, I'm going to add on a little event, a little method called message processed. And that's going to give me my message. And then you're going to notice that I'm going to start up SignalR. Once it's all started up, I'm going to enable my little button. That's all that's doing right there. Enable button. I'm going to add a click event handler. I'm going to retrieve the message from the text box. And then finally, I'm going to send that message to the server. And specifically, I'm going to call the process message method on the server. No send, no on message. I'm just going to do this. And if this was a JSON object, this was an object and not just a normal string, SignalR would automatically take care of the serialization for me. It's just that simple. And so you'll notice that if I fire up this page here, and let me just, Windows 7 was my idea. There we go. Watch this. I want you to watch the right-hand side. Bam. So it automatically sent to everybody. And if I go to the other side, there we go. This is a message from the right side. Boom, you're going to notice that it was sent everywhere. And that's the magic of SignalR, is that it makes it so much easier for me to do WebSockets without actually having to do WebSocket development. And this sort of dovetails, and something tells me you're going to have a question or two.
We have about two, but...
OK, I'll get to that in just 1 second here. But this sort of dovetails perfectly into the next module. The next module, we're going to start talking about libraries. That's the whole thing. That JavaScript gives you a lot of raw components, and a lot of other people that are much smarter than either of us have already gone out and built the add-ons and higher level tools that are using those underlying components to help make life a lot easier. So then that way we can focus on the solutions rather than on the raw individual components. OK, you had questions.
Okay, question number 1. Do you use a particular library on server side in order to use WebSockets?
Oh, okay. So the question is about library. You do have to go grab Signal. For WebSockets, sorry.
Yes.
For WebSockets, no, that it's actually part of the System Web library, the System Web namespace.
Okay. Are there any alternatives to Signal IR or Signal R? Sorry, that was typed weird. For non-ASP frameworks.
You know, the answer to that question is yes. I personally don't know what they are because I'm admittedly mostly an MVC developer. I also do Python as well, but I'm mostly an MVC developer, so I don't know the answer to that as far as actual libraries. But I guarantee you that somebody else has built it.
Okay, and wow, the questions are just coming in. When you call the Signal R from client, where did you define the URL?
Oh, so when I call the Signal R from the client, what you're going to notice right up top here is I've got 3 different script references. I've got one to jQuery. jQuery is required. And then I've got one to Signal R, which when you install Signal R through the NuGet package, which you have to do, right-click, Manage NuGet Packages, and just type in Signal R. And I've already installed it, which is why I've got the little green check, but you just install that right there. When you install that, it will automatically give you the, you're just not behaving for me. It'll automatically give me the JS file that's required right here. And then the last one that you're going to notice, so this is just the all up Signal R. And then finally, these are the specific ones. Signal R hubs for this server. And this little script right here, you'll notice Signal R hubs, which is what I'm calling. This is actually generated automatically. So if I bring my page back up, and I go to Signal R hubs, and apparently it's going to make me do it that way. Open with, yeah, fine. Okay, so I just opened that up inside of Visual Studio. What you'll notice if I scroll on down inside of here, chugga, 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 you're going to notice right there that there is that message hub. So it's actually dynamically creating this on the server. So the way that message hub becomes available is because of that call right there. Cool. All right. Last little thing I suppose that I should mention about Signal R is there is a full MVA that was done up by Brady Gaster and somebody else. I think it was John Galloway. It's either John Galloway or Jeremy Foster, one of the two. But in any event, if you want to know more about Signal R, there's actually a full MVA on Signal R. So in any event, let's go ahead, take 10 minutes, and then we'll come on back. We'll take a look at some libraries, talk about some next steps and where we go from here. I feel like I'm shorter here. Hi, welcome back. In case you're just tuning in, one more time, where have you been all day? We've been having a lot of fun. This is JavaScript for experienced developers. That's Gabby. I'm still going to avoid saying your last name.
It's okay.
I'm still Christopher. And I want to touch on one real quick thing before we get into the last module, which is on the prior module on the sockets demo. That a couple of people have mentioned in the Q&A that the sockets demo isn't working. Here's the reason why. The code is actually good, but what I want to highlight is right here. You're going to notice that I've got the sockets HTML up. You're going to notice that port number there. That when I launch my page, if I zoom on in, you're going to notice that my port number is in fact 49439. So that's why it's working here. What you'll need to do is launch the page, figure out what the port number is, and then go ahead and update that there, and then everything will work just fine. Again, make sure that you're launching this from, say, Visual Studio by using Control F5 or F5 will work as well. All right, so talk to me about libraries.
They're famous. You know, I go to them all the time. No, I'm kidding.
I see. I appreciate that sense of humor.
Thanks. It's my second favorite place to go. But yeah, so we're pretty much going to start going into our common JavaScript libraries that are pretty much used a lot. So we're going to go into jQuery, Require.js, and Micro.js. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with jQuery. jQuery, as I mentioned before, is the write less, do more JavaScript library that is available for use. So it's made to simplify the task of JavaScript by writing less code. It has a lot of built-in functionalities that you can use. So jQuery is mainly used for animations, event handling, and DOM manipulation. So there are objects in jQuery. There are built-in ones. So there's the object. There is the math object. There is, wait. Uh-oh, you guys. Is this the wrong? No. How did this happen?
Yeah, you've got it.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know, but this slide is not in here. So I was like, there's no objects in there's objects in jQuery, but
That's all right.
But we're gonna move on. Sorry about that, you guys. That wasn't supposed to be there. So we're gonna talk about installing jQuery. So there are two ways. You can either download it from jQuery.com and then include it in your HTML code, or you can include the jQuery library into your HTML code directly from the Content Delivery Network.
And that's what I've been doing on my little demos.
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm just going to show you a quick demo on installing jQuery. It's actually really, really easy. So if you just go, is it this one? Here we go. So installing jQuery, as you can see, so this is the local installation that we were speaking of, which is when you download it, and then you can keep it in a certain folder, and this is where you would kind of find the source for it. And then this one at the bottom is also kind of the same syntax. It's just that you're referencing the CDN right here. Okay. So moving on. So then we're going to talk about the jQuery syntax, which is something that, totally correct, which is something that we've kind of already discussed. So I'll just quickly go through it again. So we have our $. So you always need your $, because it pretty much indicates that jQuery is being used. That was actually a question that came up in the Q&A, so I figured I'd bring that up. Then from there, you have your selector. So your selector, like I said before, can be any HTML element, and you can get really specific with it. So your selector could say P space UL space something. Like you can go into like the first element of the unordered list object, like anything you want. You can get really specific with the selectors. You can also select classes and IDs. So if you're going to select a class, make sure you have your dot before the class name. And if you're going to have your ID, make sure you have the £sign before the class name, but they're always going to be in parentheses. And as we discussed before, that this keyword will be used when you're writing jQuery within an HTML element. So that way it's just referring back to that specific element. And then from the selector, we then have the action that needs to be performed by the element. So as I showed you here before, right now we have the hide action, which of course is very obvious as to what it does. It'll just hide that element. But there's a lot more that you can actually think of. There's actually a whole like reference website that has like every single action you can think of that's available. So definitely you can check that out. Just Bing it and boom, it'll be there. But I'm going to show you some later on in another demo. Oh, look at that. It's right here.
It's now.
So, some quick jQuery functions that we're going to go over. I'm going to kind of like build out a little web page, and it's going to have a quick little, a few little functions that you can see. So let's get over to that. So already available, I kind of have my jQuery up here imported, as you can see. And then what we have here is just a simple like square. It's going to be a nice little square, which I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Here we go. This is all we have. So we have a button that says animation, and we have this beautiful, beautiful square. However, you click the button, it does nothing. So let's continue. So in between our script tags, what we're going to do is we're going to start with some jQuery code. So what you need to know is almost all jQuery, I think all, to be honest, kind of starts in this document ready event handler. So what this is doing is it's pretty much making sure that, oops, that needs to say function. That's not how you spell function. How do you spell function, you guys? Now having a spelling bee. So the jQuery is pretty much written inside the document ready event handler, just so the code doesn't run before the document is finished loading. So that's very important. So what I want to do first is, let's see something cool. Let's make the little div fade out. So the nice little square fade out. So once again, we have our $, we have our selector, dot, fade out. Okay. So now what we have here, this is an event function, which we're going to go into depth about the different types of jQuery functions. But what happens here is you can kind of, in this parameter, you can kind of make it fade slowly or make it fade out a bit faster. So you can change the parameters within the function to kind of change how it will fade. But I'm just going to do a simple little fade out. So now when you reload, well, it kind of already faded out. So it would be, that's pretty much what it was supposed to do. It did what it was supposed to do, just did it a bit quickly. So I'll try reloading it again so you guys can all see. Oh, it faded out. Cool. So next, what I want to try to do is, how about what we're going to do is add the click function to the button, so that maybe, when you click the button, it'll make the div fade out. So let's try doing that.
As opposed to just loading the page. And
it's just gone. It's just weird. So let's just add the button selector. Button dot click. Now, if you remember what we had saw in the I think the example in one of the previous modules was that we did it like button click equals a certain function, which that is totally acceptable too. But if you just want to go straight into it, this also works. So let's try this. Let's see what happens. Let's refresh it. Awesome. Animation. Oh, wow, look at that, it worked.
Always nice when the demo just works.
It's just great. So yeah, so now I've kind of showed you how to kind of make two functions. Let's even continue with this. Let's animate it. I like to animate things. So we're just going to take out the fade out. And we are going to kind of simplify this because I want to animate it a few ways. So I'm going to create a new variable and just name it div, just so when I'm animating it, I don't have to constantly keep writing the whole selector syntax. So we're just going to do div animate. And I'm going to kind of show you how how you can do the parameters to change it in different ways and not just have animate and make it do nothing. So we're going to change the height. Let's change the height first. Change it to 300 pixels. From there, we're going to change just how much you'll see it to about 0.4. Did I spell that wrong? No, I didn't. Okay. Or did I? No, I didn't. Okay. And then we're going to make it animate very slow, something I was speaking of before. So literally, you just type in slow.
Pretty straightforward.
Let's just see what happens when you do this. Is it this one? It's this one. Okay. So let's refresh it. Animation. Oh, look at that. So I'm going to continue to just add some quick little animation code, just so you can see like a whole little cool functionality. So from here, I'm just going to change this to 0.8, but keep it slow. Then next, let's change the height to something different. So I guess 100, but keep this. And then lastly, we're going to change the, we're going to keep the height at 100, but then make it more visible. Okay, so it should do it in exactly this order. So let's see what happens. Let's reload it. Oh,
Yep, it did it.
yeah, I did do it, sorry.
Never doubt yourself.
Yes, you're right. So that's pretty much it. We're just playing around with the square. I extended it and then brought it back to normal. So that's kind of really it for the example. So what I've shown you here is, A, this is very important. Your document ready event is very, very important because, like I said, it will not execute the code until the document is fully loaded. So that's a definite plus because you don't want the jQuery going and it's like, well, how about the page load first? And then from there, we have made a nice little click function right here for the button using the button selector. And then, like I said, if you're ever going to keep repeating the same function over and over, it's kind of good to just give it a quick little variable so you're not continuously writing the selector over and over and over and over again. Okay. So moving on. So as I said, there are different method types and function types. So what I just showed you just now was kind of, I showed you an event method and I showed you an effect method. So the event method was like the click. So pretty much making something happen. So getting a response from the web page. And then the effect methods is kind of actions that you can do that'll change up the elements. So as I said, you saw the event method happen with the click. As soon as you click the button, something happened. And then immediately from there, I called an effect method. So as soon as I clicked the button, the element of the div was changed. The box went down, the box got longer, got a little dimmer, and then it went back to normal size. So now we're gonna move into require.js. So modules. Modules are actually a very favorite topic of mine, but more so because they're really used in Node.js, and I'm kind of really getting into Node right now. If you do want to know about modules in Node, there's actually an MVA that Jeremy Foster did all about packages and modules in Node.js, so check that out. But there's pretty much the same idea both in regular JavaScript and in Node. It's really just a unit of reusable code. And usually you take a bunch of modules to create, let's say, like a package. So kind of like a package in Java, you can think of it, because you are gonna incorporate it into your code just so it can go back and call those functions that it needs from your modules and different packages. So require.js is actually a framework that is able to load different files and modules onto your JavaScript code. What you'll be using is a require keyword, but I'll show you all of that just so you're not confused. And it uses asynchronous model definition to load its files. So each module will load through a synchronous request in a given order. It's not exactly, you can control how you want it to load, but usually it's more so asynchronous. And require.js can be used with jQuery, Node, like I just said, and Dojo. So two important key functions to remember is the require function and the define function. So you're going to use the require function key when you need immediate functionality, when you need it to run the code right then and there. And define is more so when you're just going to define the function and then it could be called upon later. So I'm just going to show you a small demo. I kind of have like a web app already set up with the require framework. And then I'm just going to show you like the different steps and where you can find everything. So first, you actually want to go to get require.js. You just go to require.js.org. And then honestly, you just go to download, and it has different downloads. If you just click minified or with comments, it'll open up in another page. Well, usually it does this one because you could just save it from here. But if it does open up in this page, open. Okay, well, that's the first time it ever opened up in Notepad for me. It usually opens up, I guess if you use it in Edge, it opens up right in Edge for me, and then I just save it from there. And you wanna from then import it into your code and make sure it's in a make sure it's in a folder that is a part of your web application. Mm-hmm. So where is this it? Nope, that's not it. That's not it either. Okay, so this is our web app. It's honestly a simple Hello World web app that is going to be using require. So where I really want to show you some of the elements. So the first thing is the main.js. So your main.js, as it says, var messages equals require. So this is the require keyword that we were talking about. So using this require keyword, you're pulling in a certain functionality from a module. In this case, messages is the module, just as in this line down here, print is the module that we're pulling from. So if you want to see what the functionality is, you can easily just go down to the messages module. It's right here, and right there define. So now we're defining the messages module, and that is what the require key is pulling into the main.js. Same thing, I believe, yes, the print module is right here, and once again, it's kind of just, this is defining what you want the print function to do, and the require key here is just pulling in that functionality to there. So pretty much you're now setting print to that functionality, and you can then call print anytime, and it will just execute for you. So pretty much what we have is just our simple little hello world. Is there anything in here that's important? No, this app.js pretty much is just showing all the dependencies. So when you run the code, which I believe I do not have up. Where is it? Okay. Should be able to get to users. And when you run it, so it's simply just printing hello world. Now, what you're gonna see.
Don't forget to hit allow block content.
Oh, right. Wait, where did it go? There's so much going on. Did it do it? Okay, wait. Okay, so allow block content. So what you're gonna see is in the code itself, it says in the print, well, it says in the main.js, pretty much it's telling the print function to print get hello, which is in the messages module, and the messages module says pretty much we want you to print hello world. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've printed that out. So what I don't want you to get confused with is, which I got confused, was this hello world is actually something that was just printed on the HTML file. So where that actual hello world using the require JS and the different modules printed would be in the console. So simply you just check, it's not there.
Refresh.
Refresh.
Good.
Oops.
There you go. And now go back to the console.
Console. There you go. So we have hello world right there, and that's kind of where all the functionality was pulled and executed right on the console.
Beautiful. Okay. So what Gabby just showed there was a couple of libraries, but there's a whole host of libraries that are out there. It's really just innumerable, the number of other libraries that are out there. So we're obviously not going to talk about every last library that's out there. We could go on for days.
Really?
So here's what we're going to do instead. That number one, biggest point to make here. We're not launching rockets here. That's something that a friend of mine likes to say, that whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has probably already done it. They've already written the library. Take advantage of that work. That the best code in the world is the code that's already written. Don't go blazing your own trail. Don't go reinventing the wheel. Take advantage of what's there. But that does then raise the question, how do we actually go out and find libraries? Well, Micro.js is a great place to start. I'm going to microjs.com. Okay, So first of all, on microjs.com, what I want you to notice is this is coming up. There's no www in front of that, just simply microjs.com. And this is a whole just source of various libraries and so forth that, that you can use inside of JavaScript. So, a lot of people have asked, hey, if you're looking for something that can fake a class system, there you go. Go in, do a search. There's a whole bunch of things that can fake classes for you. If you're looking for something with animation, just go in, do a search for animation. There's a whole bunch of things that can do animation. If you're looking for things that can do touch, go in, do a search. There's a whole bunch of items that can do touch for you. So this is a great place to start if you're just trying to get in and learn any JavaScript libraries. Now, the next big thing that comes up quite frequently in the JavaScript world is these four little letters, MVVM, or model, view, view, model. And everybody starts to wonder, okay, well, what does it do for you? Well, in a nutshell, it'll automatically update your UI. So if you have a JavaScript object in memory and something changes, so maybe the user did something, maybe with a WebSocket or SignalR, you got a signal from somewhere else, and something changed inside of your JavaScript, and you want to be able to automatically update the UI, MVVM can do that. And you can even go so far as to develop the other big three-letter abbreviation, SPA, or some people just simply call them SPAs, which I think is sort of, I don't know.
Weird.
Yeah. But in any event, you can develop single-page apps, which sort of like the name implies, it's just the one page and everything is on there. And there's a lot of different libraries that will allow you to do that. There's Knockout, there's Angular, there's React, there's Ember, there's Backbone, and there's a whole host of others that I'm forgetting, which then brings us to the next question, which should I learn? No, all of them. Okay, maybe not all of them. You at least want to be familiar with several of them because they all have their various strengths and weaknesses. That to compare, for example, Angular to Knockout, Knockout does exactly what I said earlier, just very basic. That if you're just looking to, hey, an object changed and I want to update my UI, Knockout is perfect for that. But if you want to create a full SPA, Knockout needs a little bit of extra help, and this is where something like Ember comes into play, or something like Angular comes into play. But the catch is that with greater power comes greater complexity. And so the learning curve on something like Angular can be a little bit steeper because of the fact that it's going to give you all that additional power. So they're all going to have their various strengths and weaknesses, so you want to be familiar with at least a handful of them. If not necessarily, really in depth, just at least sort of know what they do. Because a lot of times, the library that you choose just comes down to a personal preference, and so different teams are going to use different libraries. Okay. Last big question. Where do we go from here? Number one, jQuery. That jQuery, if you're going to be doing front-end development, is sort of a must-know. Everybody needs to know jQuery. I'd mention really quickly, we do have an MVA on jQuery. It was actually Rachel Appel and Jeremy Foster that came through and did that. If you haven't had enough of my bad jokes, there's actually an edX course that's available on jQuery. Right now, it's archived, meaning that you're not going to be able to go through it if you haven't already signed up. But it is going to be re-released. We're recording this on the 28th of October. How is it already the end of October?
I don't know.
That is just crazy. In any event, we're recording this on the 28th of October. Sometime in the next handful of weeks from here, the edX course will be re-released, so you can check that out. Do check out a couple of MVVM frameworks. I swear I'm not just trying to make this sound like an ad, but we do have MVAs on a lot of the frameworks, and more are coming, and obviously keep practicing from there.
I'd like to add something really quick.
Yeah.
Something that I've noticed when learning some of the frameworks, I'm also trying to get a little bit into Angular, is a lot of times when you're looking into these frameworks, just like he was speaking on micro.js, which is a place that'll kind of tell you about different modules and stuff like that to access these things. Mm-hmm. A lot of these frameworks, when you're looking on the website, they'll talk about NPM. And if you don't know what NPM is, I think you go to npm.org, I'm pretty sure. But it's also kind of the same thing. It's a package manager. And And with the package manager, it has a lot more for Node.js, but there are a lot of websites that still use NPM just for their own JavaScript modules and packages. So that's something you would want to, that's something you definitely want to become familiar with when you're doing these things.
npmjs.com.
There you go.
There you go. npmjs.com. Cool. So with that, we'll go ahead and put a wrap on this. So I don't notice any last big questions. Oh, somebody had mentioned about issues with library licensing. Neither one of us are lawyers, so we're going to say very simply, go talk to a lawyer when it comes to that. So in any event, Gabby, thank you. Everybody else who tuned in today and is tuning in the future, thank you. Do find us both on Twitter. Feel free to reach out. Our Twitter handles will appear now.
No. Now.
There we go. Danny was sleeping back there. In any event, so do check us out on Twitter. Down at the very bottom, you are going to notice the last poll. Please do go ahead and take the second and a half to go ahead and click from there. And with that, thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you back here again sometime in the future on MVA.
All right, welcome to Computer Science S76, Building Mobile Applications. My name is David Malin. I'll be your instructor for this summer. So we have a lot of new toys up here today, so I'm going to do my best not to embarrass myself by toggling between multiple machines and hitting this screen. So please forgive if I look like a neophyte when it comes to this stuff. But we do know a little something, at least, hopefully, about mobile applications, and that's why we're here. This course is primarily focused on the world of iOS. There are certainly alternatives out there, but the summer is only so long, so we thought we'd pick one platform and focus on two aspects of it, namely mobile web application development and native application development. And let's start there. What is meant by these two distinctions? What are we about to get into this summer? OK, so browser versus standalone. So a mobile web application is one that, of course, runs within the confines of the browser, which likely means a mobile web application is written in what language? Yeah, so HTML, CSS, and then if it's an actual application, presumably there's some programming language underlying it, so not just a markup language, so something like JavaScript. So indeed, that'll be the trio of languages that we use for mobile web applications. And now native applications. They don't run inside of a browser, so where do they run? Sorry? So on the OS itself. So there's this language called Objective-C that Apple's used for some time, most recently in the context of iOS, their mobile operating system, with which you can write native applications, which are ones that once you've written the source code, you can compile them, so to speak, into object code or machine code. And that machine code runs natively on the CPU and on the operating system that's running on an iPod, on an iPad, or on an iPhone these days. So we're going to focus on both of these over the course of the next several weeks, though mostly on the native side of things, because indeed that's probably where the greatest returns are in terms of new material and challenges. But we will spend today and the first project in the course on the mobile web aspect. So before we get there, let's take a look at what we actually mean by this. So let's start with mobile web. Here is a screenshot of a typical iPhone, and you can, of course, pull up Safari on the bottom there. And when you do, you might be inclined to actually visit a website, like Harvard's here, that's mobile friendly. So the irony is if you go to harvard.edu, you don't actually get the mobile-friendly version. You get the desktop-friendly version. But if you guess and type in manually m.harvard.edu, m generally designating mobile, you do in fact get this site, which looks much more touch-friendly. So what does it take to actually make a mobile web application like this that's clearly conducive to actually interacting it with your fingers? So things are big enough to touch, text is big enough to read. What's involved in doing this? Well, you all have probably come into this course with some background in HTML and CSS, maybe a little bit of JavaScript. But to do something like this, all you need is pure HTML, a little bit of CSS, and a little bit of savvy as to what tags and what properties actually underlie little configuration details that make things much more mobile friendly, much more touchable, much larger at the end of the day. So here's an example of Harvard's site. It may look like these things are buttons, 4 buttons here, 3 buttons down, but all these are pings or GIFs or JPEGs in image tags, IMG tags, with which you're probably familiar. They're laid out in some kind of grid fashion with a table or with a sequence of divs. And so they've just been optimized by the designers to be sort of conducive to being touched by one's finger. And the graphics have all been similarly designed in Photoshop, but they're like to fit in this interface. So at the end of the day, if we look underneath the hood at this website and look at its code, you're just going to see some fairly familiar HTML, CSS, and not all that much magic. But there probably are a few tags that underlie it that make it a little more mobile friendly, just like they do sites like these. You would just take it for granted that when you pull up a site like Gmail or m.harvard.edu or dozens of others out there that you might use, that they come up in this web mobile conducive way. But it does take a little bit of savvy. So before we dive into anything approaching the native side of things, let's take a look at HTML5. So if you've been programming HTML in some form for some time, you probably started out with earlier iterations, maybe even XHTML and various tags that have come and gone over the years. But HTML5 is now what's with us, and browser support is increasing for its several features. We won't dwell too much on the basics of HTML, because I'll assume that you largely know those. But what we will do is try to solve at least one problem. But first, some canonical HTML. There we go, my first goof. All right. There's what lies ahead. So let's go to, let's say, this slide here. All right, just as I intended. So this is a mobile website that we've made for the course, Computer Science S76. And it's got 2 links, lectures and syllabus. But odds are most of you can barely, if at all, see lectures or syllabus. And yet this is just very simple HTML. In fact, what tags have I probably used in this website? I can show off that this thing does actually work on demand. So we've used the anchor tag to actually have a link that's clickable in blue there. What other tags are probably there? What's that? So the list tag. So a UL tag for unordered list probably, an LI tag, and then the easy ones, HTML, body, head, title, and all of the other boring ones that probably underlie this page. But I haven't really told the browser that I should anticipate that this thing's going to be viewed on a mobile device. It's barely legible. And why is that? Well, most browsers assume by default, even mobile browsers running on our phones these days, that they're sized really for desktop computers. And just in case this is actually a real website with lots of graphics and text, your phone is going to show it at the default zoom level, which is not going to lend itself to actually seeing up close what the text is that you've actually marked up there. So how can we go about fixing this? What's the easiest kludge via which we can fix this problem? Enlarge the font size, right? We can deploy some CSS. We can change the font size, the font family, any number of tweaks we can make aesthetically in hopes that it actually works. Unfortunately, then, if you then view the same site on a desktop browser, if that's also your goal, then the thing's going to look like the opposite problem has happened. So we need somehow we need some way of telling the browser dynamically to size itself based on what the device actually is. And it turns out there's a way of doing this. So with one of these meta tags, which to date you might not ever have used, or if you've used them for keywords or for descriptions underneath a web page, you can actually use them for other names, namely one called viewport. So name equals quote unquote viewport. And if we give it a content or just a value of this, width equals device width, you can probably infer from this what it's going to do. It's essentially instructing the browser that it should size the web page based on the device width, not some assumption of a typical web page, which might be 800 pixels, 1024 pixels, or even bigger these days. And literally, just by putting that in the head of my web page's HTML, I end up getting an example like this with no other changes. Much more readable, sizes to a reasonable extent. And this is one of the most useful things you can do, certainly for a text-driven website, in just making things work on your mobile browsers. Now, if we go back here, it turns out there's a bunch of other things. And this might now explain why you've gone to some mobile, unfriendly websites and have been driven nuts by the fact that you can't do what on some mobile websites on your phone? So you can't zoom. No matter how you try to pinch and zoom, it just doesn't work, frankly, because some idiot has disabled it by way of one of these meta tags by specifying that the minimum scale or the maximum scale of his or her website is, for instance, 1.0. That's the maximum and the minimum via which you might want to scale it. Now, the upside of doing something like this is that the site is probably going to look exactly the way the designer intended. The downside, of course, is that if your eyes are not consistent with the designer's vision, you're not even going to be able to override that setting. So some value, but also a frustration. So do bear in mind, too, that just because things work well for you on your own phone doesn't necessarily mean your users are going to be as enamored. But by far, the most useful at first glance for us would be something like this, and just solving that particular problem. All right. So let's take a look then at a more generalized web page. Let me see if I can master this yet. So here, I propose that this is the simplest possible web page that we can make in HTML5 that validates and at least has some bare minimum of content. So for those unfamiliar with HTML5, turns out it's probably simpler than the flavor of HTML with which you've been familiar. One, the doctype is no longer the atrocious, unmemorable thing that it was for some time with HTML4, with XHTML. It's quite simply open a bracket, bang, doctype, HTML. And then below that, you actually have the body of your web page. So this is called the doctype declaration, the document type declaration. And all this really is a signal, a hint to the browser that's reading the contents of this .html file, what version of HTML it is. Because if you've been designing pages for the web for some time, you've probably run into various headaches with Chrome or Firefox or IE or other browsers because they all behave slightly differently. You might have come across something called quirks mode. And quirks mode essentially dictates how a browser interprets certain patterns of HTML. And long story short, it's this doctype that hopefully these days will increasingly kick browsers into a standards compliant mode so that your pages work more consistently across multiple browsers. All right, but this here is a representative web page, but we can do more than this. Suppose that we actually want to infuse a bit of stylization. We can add this line here in yellow. Functionally, what happens now when a web browser visits a web page containing these contents as it parses the file, top to bottom, left to right? Tell a story, if you could, just in your own words, somehow involving the network, somehow involving whatever this yellow tag is, that explains, for those less familiar, what this line of yellow text is doing functionally. OK, good. So it loads the file, styles.css, from the server, which turns out is just a text file. And in that text file is, as you might have guessed, CSS, or cascading style sheet rules. It does load it synchronously, top to bottom. So there is, in fact, an order to the tags in HTML, so that if you load a file here and then another one here, you can, in fact, assume that B is going to be loaded after A, which certainly has its advantages, though we'll see some problems that can nonetheless arise when it comes to this sort of worry about synchronization. This relation here is just telling the browser that the relation of this file to the rest of the HTML here is that it's meant to be a style sheet, so it should somehow be applied. And so inside of this styles.css file is your typical rules for fonts and colors and borders and all of that. And they are then applied to all of the elements, all of the tags subsequently in this web page. So that, too, is probably familiar, but we'll use this to our advantage as time passes, certainly to stylize things and perhaps solve some additional problems that might arise. In fact, let's go ahead and propose this. This website that we have here is pretty damn uninteresting. All we have is a super simple text-based website for the course. Not all that compelling, even though if we click through these various links on the course's website, we would actually get to the PDFs and the content that we want. But let's see if we can't stylize this a bit more so that we can make a web application look more like it's a native application, even though I have no idea yet how to write a single line of Objective-C. So let's try to make this look more like an actual application. So to do this, let me offer a brief aside on the ways in which you can approach development of web-based applications on your own Mac, presumably, but the same holds true for PCs. Whenever you start writing in JavaScript code, if unfamiliar, you often trip over a security feature of browsers, whereby if you try to run a JavaScript file locally that's living on your own hard drive, it's not going to run because the browser's trying to protect you against something that could very well be malicious. So you can work around this by changing Chrome settings or changing Safari's or your various browser settings. Or we can solve this problem by just introducing an actual web server. Now, it would be a pain if we all had to go out and buy a commercial web host and maybe a domain name and actually put all of our files for the course and for this first project on some remote server. But we can actually replicate that idea even without having internet access ultimately by just running a web server on our own computer. So what I'm going to propose that you do for this first project, which we'll talk about later, but what I've done here in advance is I've downloaded some free software called XAMPP. XAMPP. And this is free software that actually exists for Mac OS, Linux, Windows, and probably a couple of other operating systems that once you figure out how to navigate its somewhat cryptic pages of links, you can get down to the download page and download, in this case, the universal binary for Mac OS. And as an aside, for any projects, we would point you in this direction explicitly. You don't have to memorize all of these little details. But long story short, once I download this program, run it on my local computer, it will install free software called Apache. Apache is a very popular web server software that's used all throughout the world, and you can run it on your little old laptop in addition to PHP and MySQL, which also comes with XAMPP. But what's nice about this is that it gets you up and running super fast, even without having to tinker with your Mac's own built-in settings. So I did this in advance, and I ran the installer, and what that gives me is a program called the XAMPP control panel. So I'm going to go ahead and load this file here, and I'm going to get a very simple two screens. One is just a reminder of how to get started with this thing, and the other is just this little control panel via which I can start Apache. And we're not going to bother using FTP or MySQL. All we need is a place to put our files. I'm being prompted for my password there, and I should now see a green light, which indicates that a web server is running on my computer. Unfortunately, my computer here is not on the public internet. I don't even know what its IP address is, and it definitely doesn't have a domain name. So how do I go about accessing with a browser, let's forget about phones for the moment, the web server that's now running on my particular laptop here? Yeah, so it turns out that all computers that are running web servers are configured with a default name, and that name is usually localhost. So if I pull up a browser, I happen to be using Chrome, but I could use Safari or whatever else I have on my own Mac here, and I do http://localhost, one word, and then hit enter, what I'll see is this default page. So this is coming from a web server. It just so happens that that web server is running where? Okay, on my own laptop. Has nothing to do with the internet. I could unplug my cable now. I could turn off the Wi-Fi, and I could still actually interface with this development environment. And so that's what we're going to use it for. You don't strictly have to do this for the first project, but this is a nice and quick and dirty way of getting yourself up and running with a web server. So now we can get back to focusing on the web stuff and the development thereof. So what I'm actually going to do next is I'm going to grab the distribution code for tonight's lecture. So if I go to cs76.net, if you have trouble getting on Wi-Fi during the break, we can log in as ourselves if need be, or you can use your Harvard University ID and PIN. But we'll take a break in a little while. You can field those kinds of questions. If we go to the course's website and go to lectures, I myself am going to scroll down to source code. I'm going to download a zip of that source code. Once I unzip it, it's going to end up on my desktop, and it's going to be a directory called source 0. And in there is all of tonight's examples in advance in case we want to pull up something that's been pre-written. And what I'm going to do now, for those less familiar, let's see. Actually, I'm going to do this the easy way. I'm going to open up my Finder. I'm going to go ahead and find my own personal jHarvard directory. And I'm going to create in this directory a folder called Sites. Now, I had no idea that I was supposed to create a folder called Sites until I read this little cheat sheet that popped up automatically when XAMPP was installed. Now, tragically, there's a typo in the little cheat sheet here, and it says create a folder called Sites-folder. There should be no dash. There should be no folder. It's just a folder called Sites. But now that I've done this, anything I put in there is going to be accessible on that web server running locally as though I had put it there via FTP or SFTP. All I'm going to do is start putting my files in there. So for simplicity, what I'm going to do is drag my source 0 directory into my sites directory so that for the rest of tonight, everything is in that folder. And now I argue that it's accessible via my browser. So let me prove that. Let me go back to my browser. Let me go to http://localhost. Unfortunately, I still see this default screen, and XAMPP has taken it upon itself to redirect me even more deeply into the server. But I'm going to say no. I want to go to tilde jharvard and then hit enter. And now I see the contents of John Harvard's sites folder. And so what's in there now is my source 0 directory. And now we can resume our look at this really poorly implemented website for the course now that we have a web server running locally, now that I've copied the distribution code for tonight into that public directory, and now that I've pulled up the appropriate URL in my browser connecting to that local web server. All right. That was perhaps a lot that was new. Again, the project specification will recap any details you need to repeat yourself. But any questions, conceptually or technologically, as to what we just did? Yeah. Sure.
Don't Unix systems typically have Apache pre-bundled?
They do.
So is this installing or just activating it or enabling it?
This, I believe, comes with its own installation of Apache. So the little white lie I'm telling here is that macOS actually comes with its own instance of Apache. The upside of using XAMPP is that it works the same across various versions, Lion, Mountain Lion, of macOS. So there's many fewer technical difficulties that we've run into than having everyone turn on Apache, which is not turned on by default by Apple. And this way, too, when you upgrade macOS, XAMPP should not break on you because everything's isolated to one folder. Yes?
So I don't know why I think my Apache is on.
OK.
Somehow I got a site folder inside my folder thing.
OK.
I can't open another site folder, so now it's not working. What should I do?
OK. You have a sites folder called SITES.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's inside of that?
It's like images and an index.html.
Oh, I wonder if that ended up in, I have another account on this laptop, and maybe that guy got that. OK, so I think it's safe for you to delete the images folder, delete the index.html folder, and then you will be in the state that I'm in by dragging the source directory into that folder.
So I'll just keep that.
That's all in this episode. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the next episode, we will cover the remaining part of this course. Is your mind ringing with questions, queries, or doubts? Do you wish to learn more? Then visit our website www.millionlights.org and post your questions on our forum. We will be really happy to clear all your doubts. If you missed anything and want to rewatch it, you can download it from our website or can watch online as well. You can also participate in our webinars, discussions with the subject experts, as well as get Microsoft certification on various courses through our website. You can also find us on Facebook by the name Millionlights and also on Twitter. For more such interesting tutorials on coding, app development, programming, and building rich UIs, keep watching Microsoft Art of Code, brought to you by Millionlights. Thank you.